I let out a blood-curdling scream. Hey guys, James here. I'm one of the founders of Cortex Education, and I'm a college admissions consultant who focuses on personal development as the best way to achieve success. Today, I got a good one for you all, so be sure to watch until the end, because in addition to the story of my encounter with an undead spider and how it helped me get into Stanford, thanks Spider, I'll show you how this all breaks down into real actionable steps for your applications. But before we jump in, be sure to hit that like button down below, because if you don't, the YouTube algorithm says, man, these videos are really crummy, and it won't show them to anybody else who might benefit from them. And also, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss any of the content that I have coming out for you all. And let's get into today's video. Well, we're near the end of the school year, and for some of you, you are at the end of the school year. And what that means is that I'm starting to work with my students on figuring out what topics they're gonna write about for their college admissions essays. And it's time to come up with those topics. And every year, as I'm working with students, the same types of mistakes tend to pop up. And I'll quickly go over two of them, and then we'll talk about how that's relevant to today's topic. First mistake, we have the types of essays that I call the show-offs. These are the essays that focus way too much on just a list of accomplishments. And I'm talking about those essays that are like, hey, yeah, I won, 10 math competitions in sophomore year, or my poetry won 3 different county competitions last year. These essays are not impressive, because why? Newsflash, colleges don't care all that much what you did in high school. Does that sound odd? Well, it should, because most of us think, well, college admissions is based on your achievements in high school, right? Kind of. The fact is that whatever you do in college and whatever you do after college is supposed to be way more interesting, way more impressive than what you do in high school. So college admissions officers don't care all that much what you did in high school, except to the extent that it might predict or it's predictive of what you'll accomplish in college and beyond. To get an idea of what I'm talking about, imagine you graduate from Harvard someday. You will literally never talk about your high school accomplishments ever again. And so when people find out that you're a Harvard graduate, they're gonna be like, oh, cool, what did you do in college? What did you do after college? So what you achieve in high school is not actually that interesting to college admissions officers, except to the extent that you say that this is predictive of what I will do in the future. So that's the first type of mistake, the show-off essay. The second biggest type of mistake that I see is the sob story. And this comes up all the time. Why? Because colleges ask about your most challenging situations that you've been through. They want to know what kind of resilience you've shown through the years. The problem with the sob story, though, is that it focuses on just the sob story portion, and it does not focus on what you did after that to get over the challenge. So that's a huge misconception, right? Colleges do want to hear about the challenges you've been through, but more importantly, they want to know how you handled those challenges. Not just, give us an accounting of all the bad things that have happened to you. Oh my goodness, we better give you a spot at MIT. That's not how it works. They want to see that you have resilience. So you need to focus those essays on your resilience. Those are the two biggest mistakes that I see students making when they're choosing topics for college essays. And we'll talk more about that in a future video, but suffice to say for this video, those common mistakes usually involve one of two things, either big accomplishments or big life events. And that's the key to today's video. Students often overlook the little things that actually show a lot about you. And these are the types of things that you do when you aren't thinking about college admissions at all, right? These are the little moments in your daily life. So with that said, let me tell you a little story. When I was in high school, I loved churros from Costco. I'm talking about those Tío Pepe's churros that come in a box and they're all frozen. They were, and probably still are, I wouldn't know, delicious. And on one fine Tuesday, I came home from school as usual around 3:30, and I, as a hungry high school student, I went to the fridge, started looking around, scanning to see what I could eat, and boop, I chose to eat a churro. So I pulled out one of those frozen Tío Pepe's churros, and I popped it into the toaster oven. 5 minutes later, I pulled out the churro, and I started cutting it into slices. I cut it into 1 slice, 2 slices, 3 slices, 4 slices, when something caught the corner of my eye. I looked over, and to my horror, a little gray spider about that big started crawling out of the second slice. I let out a blood-curdling scream. I'm talking about one of those screams that echoes around the neighborhood and then a flock of birds goes out of the trees. It was horrifying because I did not expect to see anything living on my plate, but there it was. So what happened here? Well, apparently the spider had gotten into the batter for the churros at some point in the factory, in the churro factory, and it was frozen down in that churro, and it remained frozen for weeks or months as it went to Costco, and then after we bought it, and then it was in our fridge, and then when I finally warmed up the churro again, this spider, which had been frozen, actually came back to life. This is what we call cryogenics. So that was super interesting, right? I was just innocently trying to have a snack one day after school when I ran into, something that scientists have been trying to do for decades, which is to freeze an animal and then bring it back to life. And so after that incident, I went and read all about cryogenics. I learned all about it and I was really obsessed with it for at least a couple of weeks. Later on, when I was a senior and I was applying to colleges, I told this very story in one of my college admissions essays. Notice that in this story, there was no award, no accomplishments, no achievements, no ribbons, no participation ribbons even. And there was no sob story, obviously. I mean, of course, there was the blood-curdling scream, but there was no sob story. And yet, this was a very appealing story for the college admissions officers. Why? It was not because of the spider. I mean, that's an interesting situation that I was in, but it was because of the way that I thought about the experience, the way that I processed it, right? College admissions officers are looking at your essays to get evidence of how you think about your world. They really don't care that much what you're observing or what happens to you. They want to know, how does your brain process everything that is happening to you, right? So they want to know that you have curiosity. Instead of just freaking out about the spider, well, I freaked out, and then very quickly my curiosity took over and I learned all kinds of things about cryogenics and the feasibility of using that for something like deep space travel. And no, I have not eaten any frozen churros since that fateful day. All right, enough about me. Let's talk about you and how this all applies to you. What does this tell us about what colleges are looking for? Well, this is a perfect time to talk about what's called intellectual vitality. So intellectual vitality, I like to think of as two things. The first is the absorption of knowledge, the love of learning, right? You love to take in information. The second part of intellectual vitality is producing new ideas or, generating questions, generating thoughts once you've learned something. And I think both of those halves are very important to show in your college admissions essays. In this particular case, the spider essay showed the in portion of intellectual vitality. I was curious and I learned a lot about this topic of cryogenics after this horrifying incident. In my other essays for that same Stanford application, I demonstrated the out portion as well, which related to how I was constantly tinkering and building things around the house. You don't have to illustrate both sides of intellectual vitality necessarily in the same essay. They can each cover, a different portion of the concept of taking in information and producing new ideas. All right, so how can we make sure that you're showing intellectual vitality and that you can successfully talk about this in your admissions essays? Well, the first thing is to constantly be learning. Ask why, constantly. Be like that 5-year-old that keeps asking, but why? But in this case, instead of bugging your parents, go bug Google. Google has all the patience in the world, and you can find out amazing things just by Googling and searching and asking why. Read constantly. With all of its distractions, the internet can either be your worst enemy when it comes to trying to succeed, or it can be your best friend. And you want to build a daily reading habit. I've talked about this, the importance of building a daily reading habit before on my channel, and I've talked about it in live presentations that I've made to all kinds of audiences, and I'll say it again. It's super important to develop a habit of reading at least 15 minutes per day about something that challenges you intellectually and literarily. And if you're a senior or a rising senior and you're now trying to think about which essay topics to write about, think about your daily habits that show your curiosity. For example, I had a senior this year who loved talking about rocket science with his dad. His dad was a rocket engineer, and this was something that they bonded over the dinner table. And my student also wrote about going to the gym, and instead of just showing up and lifting things up and putting them down. He actually studied the muscle activation patterns of different lifting techniques, and he would come up with really effective combinations for his training. And so you see that there are all kinds of opportunities in your daily life to practice this muscle of intellectual vitality. In one case, my student was just talking to his dad about his dad's work and getting really interested in that. And in the other case, he took something that doesn't have to be that intellectual, going to the gym, and he made it something very intellectual. And that's what made his essays so interesting. And here's another way. You can ask yourself this question: what's something that you know that most other people don't, or most people would disagree with you about? And that could be a really interesting place to start, and it can be a great opportunity to show how you think differently and you think independently of others. So that's all I had to say about this topic. Hopefully you enjoyed this little story about one of the most interesting and horrifying moments of my high school career. If you want a chance to see cryogenics in action, I've put down a link to Tio Pepe's Churros below. So, that's your ticket to potentially seeing a really interesting science phenomenon go on in your very own home. And also hit that like button down below, because if you don't, the YouTube algorithm is not going to share this video with anybody else who might benefit from it. And also hit that notification bell and the subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content that I have coming out for all you guys in the coming weeks. Again, my name is James, and I'm one of the founders of Cortex Education. I'm a college admissions consultant focusing on personal development as the best way to achieve success. And thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.